All right. So the first question for all of you is, have you accepted campaign contributions from developers, corporations, realtors, or landlords?
So you learn a lot of things running for council that the average person has no reason to know. One of them is like the little intricacies of campaign finance funding limits and what different groups are allowed to donate. I was actually sort of surprised that in Burlingame, an individual real-life human is allowed to donate a max, it's about $688. If you are an organization, so a political action committee, or even a just real-life for-profit corporation, you're allowed to donate double the amount of money that an actual human being is allowed. That strikes me as odd, and I think we should change that. But I personally have a stance of not accepting money from any corporations, no matter the industry. So I've taken zero. I think I have one personal friend who's a realtor who gave me $100, and I've accepted money from a labor group that works in real estate, but otherwise, no corporate real estate donations, no corporate donations period, and no political action committee from real estate interests, corporate real estate interests.
What about developer?
No, I don't think any of my friends are developers, so.
I genuinely appreciate the question and the opportunity to respond to it. So I did bring some statistics. So this is, I think, hot off the press data from my treasurer. So 41% of my donations are $100 or less. 9% of them are people that gave $1,000 or more. And I'm grateful for every single donation. Of those folks, over 80% of my donors are people who are anything but the following categories. So these are mostly community people who are lawyers, doctors, consultants, stay-at-home parents, whatever they are. I know a lot of people in BCE Foundation who believe in my work and the kind of leadership I do. Of the other percent that's left, we've got 3% are from realtors, 7% is from unions, because I do have a strong, firm commitment to paying people fairly. I think that's part of affordability solving we need to do. 7% are from land developers, or that's what the category is here, and 2% are from other political campaigns, so other colleagues or elected officials across the county. So I think the bottom line is anybody who thinks that I'm in the pocket of developers or landowners and that's driving my views, I think that's inaccurate and unfair. I would also like to add, we have campaign limits in Burlingame. The maximum anybody can donate, a corporation or an individual, a married couple, is $1,388. Nobody, I would never sell my soul to anybody for $1,388. Nobody buys Emily Beach for anything. So I have my views, and my views are forthright. I have been forthright. There are some views in this group that we have had to agree to disagree on policy for many years. That doesn't mean I don't care about what you value. But my views have been consistent, and if people want to donate to my campaign because they appreciate my views drive my views. If people want to support my candidacy because they know I'm an open and accessible candidate, that's fine. And until the time that we the people want to fund $50,000 or so what it takes to run a campaign, we have to raise it, and I wish we wouldn't have to.
So thank you very much. It is a good question, and one thing I will say is that all of the funding that I have received has been, virtually all of it has been local. The few dollars that have come from non-local have been people like my parents who live in Sacramento, so my brother or sister, people like that. But all of my money has come from Burlingame. It has not come from out of state. And it has come from people and colleagues that I've worked with over the years. I have about 150 donors. I looked through the list to see if anyone was a developer. I don't know if they're doing maybe single-family home development, but right now I don't believe I have any big developers. I do have property owners that have ownership of property in and around Burlingame, either through the, they might be on the avenue. Some of those are people who my children have gone to school with. They're people I've known, regardless, anyway, coach their kids in softball, good friends, people who I haven't done business with but just happen to be in that business. I do also have some funding from unions. My family is 5 generations of union, going back to my great-grandfather, who was the president of the Elevator Operators Union, and down to my soon-to-be public school teacher daughter, who will be a teacher in the teachers union. So I've always had a good relationship with the unions, and I've always had a positive working. I think they're very happy about the work we're doing here to get, for example, the community center built, and I think they're very happy about the work we're doing with affordable housing, and anything we're doing in Burlingame is prevailing wage or almost all union labor. So developers, real estate agents, yes, I don't think I have developers, but I do have some real estate agents. We do have some property owners. What was the other category?
Corporations, realtors, landlords.
Corporations, I do have some local businesses like Kearns, Maloof's, the Studio Shop, people who've been here for a long time.
It's a two-part question, one from the incumbents and one for Mike. What agreements did you get from Facebook to help address housing and transportation issues before approving their 3,500 employee development for Opley's? And then for Mike, what should they have done? So, Donna and Emily, who wants to go first?
So this project was approved when neither Vice Mayor Beach nor I were on the council when this project was approved. This project was approved right after the Great Recession in 2012. And it was at a time when we were experiencing about a 12 to 15% unemployment rate here in Burlingame and in the county. So it was a very good economic decision for the council to make at that point in time. And I believe they extracted about $1 million worth of funding to help pay for the Broadway overpass and a couple of the other things that were going. The good news is we have put in affordable commercial linkage fees now to pay for affordable housing. If those had been in place at the time, we would have generated around $16 million. They are in place now. We will be doing it now. The other good news is that Oculus is very concerned and working very hard on a few things: transportation, housing, and daycare. And we've had the opportunity to work with them and to make sure that their employees are going to be coming in through transit and on buses as opposed to driving individual cars. So we're very happy about that. And we don't know that there's actually going to be 3,500 people. I was actually talking to the treasurer yesterday, and they were saying there might actually be fewer because they have a lot of space dedicated to food, service, because they want their employees to stay local. They don't actually usually leave the campus, as well as gyms and other amenities, and they have a lot of working space and working rooms. So we're not actually sure, but they have been, I will tell you, they have been a very good partner to us in helping mitigate, and we're lucky it's a single tenant and not 2 or 3. And they're replacing the 3,000 jobs that left when Virgin Atlantic left. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The mayor addressed it. And remember, the Facebook did, Oculus, the virtual reality division, didn't build it. They are the renters. They are the tenants of this development. That was a company, that's a Chinese company that built it. And so the mayor did explain that that was approved in 2012. It had been a 10-year process, so I won't repeat those things. I think what's fair to say is there are very legitimate reasons to be concerned. And the concerns of this community that it could drive up, right, more market demand for renting homes. Yes, that's a supply-demand issue, and it could make affordability challenges even more severe. I acknowledge that. I also acknowledge that there could be significant traffic impacts, but you should know that the city is working really hard on that. Working really hard with Facebook to mitigate the traffic impact, and through policy levers, right, and plans to address reducing driving alone. Now, if that development had been approved in 2019 or 2015 when we were here, we have much more sophisticated policies, as the mayor alluded to. We now have impact fees so that any development, whether it's housing or commercial, has to pay into a piggy bank that is earmarked for affordable housing funds. Okay, we would have had that. We didn't have that then. We have it now. We legislated that in the last 4 years. We would also have much stricter traffic demand management policies that would control the number of auto trips and they are required to do some shuttles, and they were required to pay for the Broadway overchange, but we would be much more sophisticated now, and we've all learned as a Bay Area that we do have to put those policies in place. What I can tell you, the last thing I'll say about Facebook is we are in touch with them. They want to be good community partners. I was quoted in the paper. I think what that means is that we are talking with them about our challenges of transportation and affordability. And I think if you look and watch this, relationships that we're developing in the months ahead, they will invest in this community in multiple ways, including tackling affordability, including our schools and our education and makerspace, and including transportation, Bay Trail connections, and other things.
So I sort of agree that when the economic environment when this project was approved in 2012 was very different. They probably extracted about as much as you could. I think that the distinction between myself and the current council is how seriously we need to take development going forward. My background since leaving the classroom, I got very involved in data and operations and education. So my instinct in addressing any new problem is to look at the data. And what we have seen in this county over the last decade is we have added something like 83,000 jobs just in San Mateo County, and we've built only 7,100 homes. And when you look at that ratio between adding tens of thousands of new jobs and not meeting very little of the housing demand that creates, you get a massive affordability crisis. Housing experts will tell you that every 1.5 jobs you add creates demand for one new home. So that Facebook Oculus campus at 3,500 employees creates demand for about 2,300 new homes. If you look at the rest of the city, at best, we have 1,500 homes in the pipeline. So we're only meeting 2/3 of the demand created just by Oculus, and yet the general plan we passed this year massively upzones large portions of the Bayfront by 3x. So actually that Oculus campus could be 3 times the size if it were proposed today. I think the fundamental problem in Burlingame going forward is that we are intentionally planning for 10,000 new jobs, but we're going to build, at best, 3,000 new homes. Pretty much no matter what you do, that is going to cause rents to go up, and it's probably going to cause traffic to get worse. And I think we need to be much more insistent on the Bayfront that if you want to grow there, Facebook or whoever, you need to start building homes for your employees right next door. That will help people not have to drive from far away, and will help affordability a ton if those new highly paid workers end up living in brand new apartments there instead of coming to downtown and trying to live here. Thank you.
30 seconds, people. What I have loved about this campaign is it's such an intellectual debate. We have 3 smart people up here. There's no dum-dums. And it's been really exciting to talk about this stuff. I hope there will be a question about the general plan and the balance of housing and commercial. I want to address that. I can't do that in 30 seconds, but please ask a question. What I do want to correct the record is what we did as far as totally upzoning the Bayfront. I'm sorry, it's not accurate for those of us who were deeply involved. We actually downzoned portions, and this is checked with staff, of our Bayfront to we downzoned and we capped where there were no caps before on floor area ratio. So we did do some incremental changes. Sorry. No?
Can I respond?
Still got to do it. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't get to finish my Sorry.
So just to be clear, I was trying to be careful in what I said. I understand the point about that there's 2 different, in the general plan, 2 different portions of the Bayfront, the Inner Bay Shore and then the Bayfront commercial area. I get that Inner Bay Shore was capped when it wasn't before. I'm talking about the Bayfront commercial area, which are the most prime properties, and that's where Oculus is going to be. There's something called a floor area ratio. It had been set at 1.0. It's now set.
0 cap. It was 0 cap and we capped it.
Okay. Well, that's all. I looked at the development agreement. That's all I said. So it's at 3.0 now.
Yeah, it was on.
Another one would go along with that, and then we'll get back to other pressing issues, is who are your heroes and why? Okay.
My biggest hero is my little sister. She has taught in an inner city public school for 30 years. She and her husband taught for 38 years. My mom taught for 25 years. My sister's my hero. She gets up every single day. She goes in and she works at a school that's 100% free and reduced lunch. My daughter goes with her often. That's why she wants to be a teacher too. And she works with a group of kids that are on the verge of never graduating from school. She coaches softball. She has put a number of low-income minority kids into Division I colleges. She has been just an incredible inspiration to me as a person who has given her life to public service in a way that very few people can do this day and age. She raised two amazing sons that both went on to one become a leader in autism, working with kids with autism, the other is a structural engineer, and I am so proud to have her as my role model and the person that I look up to probably the most in this world. And I also really appreciate my husband, who is there by me every step of the way, helping out along life's great journey. And as you can tell from my previous story, I really, really appreciate him and the beautiful family that God has given me, and all the lovely things in life. So, thank you all.
My sort of inclination is, when I think about people I admire, is people who do things that were considered totally impossible, and everyone told them they were wrong, and they still ended up doing it anyways. I feel somewhat conflicted on this first hero, but I think they meet that criteria. So I read a really good biography on Tesla CEO Elon Musk. And one of the things that came out of that is that at one point he was facing a situation where Tesla was about to fail, SpaceX, which was his other company, was about to fail. And he basically had to work through like 2 weeks of trying to put this all together. And a quote really stuck out to me that one of like the board members of one of the companies said that basically Elon as a human being can tolerate more stress than any other human being alive on the planet. And it makes me think about all the times in my life when you're working hard and you have a vision of what the future can be, and it's just like you're so tired, or you've been rejected so many times, and it's like, how do you keep going? It's like, man, at least I didn't have to go through that. And if a human being can do that, I can probably deal with whatever garbage I'm dealing with in my life. I say conflicted, he's also done a bunch of other crazy stuff. So. But I think that the example of shooting for huge things is something I do admire. I also really admire my wife. She is an immigrant from, she's Indian, but she grew up in Kuwait. Her family actually had to evacuate Kuwait during the first Persian Gulf War, and very luckily made it out through Jordan and were able to go to India. But she is the hardest working person I've ever met in person, and is the only reason we're able to stay in a place like this is how hard she works. So I'm very thankful for her.
Thank you. So many heroes, but I'll pick my grandmother, my immigrant grandmother, who came to this country. I think she was the youngest of 10. They literally didn't have enough money for shoes. She was abused by her father. She was very sickly. She raised my dad and his two brothers and sisters in a farmhouse in Maine, 18-room farmhouse in Maine without heat in the 1940s and 50s. So my dad grew up with like a piece of coal in his bed, like if he lived in 1800s, for heat. My dad went to a one-room schoolhouse. But this woman had vision. And she had, I think, a 7th or 8th grade education, but she always talked about how important education was. And she would buy one piece of china at a time and set the table, and once a month make them dress up in their church clothes and learn how to eat properly at the table. Not because she knew, but she read books on how to eat the silverware properly. And she said to my father and his brothers and sisters, someday you might have dinner with the governor and you need to know how to eat properly. My dad, when he was 14 or 15, got a scholarship with the Civil Air Patrol, and he got to eat with the governor in Maine, and that was a really cool story. So she's one of my heroes. She had grit and stealing her back, and she's a tough lady. My other hero, I could be my parents, my brother, for a number of reasons. How much time do I have? But I say in the political sphere, I think our Congresswoman Jackie Spear is amazing. If you haven't read her book, Undaunted. Not only has she done incredible policy work in California and in the federal government, but I think that woman, more than any, exemplifies a person who has dealt with personal hardship on many, many levels, and has come out of that stronger and more beautiful, with deeper faith and deeper commitment of mission in her life to make the world a better place. And I think that's what we all need in our elected leaders. It's what we all need in our communities and our teachers and our volunteers. If we are all trying to make the world a little bit better place and stop being so cynical, despite hardship, she's I think a superhero for all of us. So thank you.
How are impact fees being used, and who will they help on an affordability spectrum?
Okay. As I mentioned, impact fees are awesome. Finally, we've got developers, not the taxpayers of Burlingame, kicking in money that's set appropriately. We don't want to stifle housing development because really we have a supply and demand challenge. We want more housing to come, but in a way that they can appropriately share to put in a piggy bank to siphon off for affordable housing funds. The thing that I'm really proud of this council for doing is not only leading to building more supply of market and supply of affordable, both of those things with our impact fees, but we are also doing something pretty innovative, and I'm not aware of any other community doing it on the peninsula. And I'm proud of the fact that I suggested it and it got traction with our council. I think it was October of 2018, that meeting. But we talked about, as these fees come in, we have to address the long term for the community. We have to address the root cause, which is more housing and more affordable housing supply. But we also have to help the short-term needs of the community. And so this council has hired a consultant, Bill Lowell, former housing expert at the county, to help us figure out how can we take a portion of our housing fees, we don't know what that percentage is yet, whether it's 10, 15, 25%, and help short-term needs for Burlingame renters that are in a state of crisis. And that if we can help them, what we're figuring out is how to work with Samaritan House, a nonprofit, so we're not building another bureaucracy in a small city, but giving money so that Samaritan House can direct that towards Burlingame residents who need maybe at one given time a $1,000 pop or a $3,000 pop. Sometimes as little as those dollars can help keep a family housed in a moment of crisis, and that is the best way to stop homelessness or displacement. And it's not going to solve everybody's problems of affordability, but we can help keep Burlingame residents here who really need the help. So we're going to do the short term and the long term investment too. And I think those are some really important things we're putting into place.
Do you want to add to that?
So I think the two other candidates will tell you sort of what the city's doing. I think investing in short-term assistance is a good idea. I worry about sort of the bigger picture. So even if we do build a few hundred units of affordable housing, when you get this jobs housing balance off, there's a much, much larger pool of renters that get squeezed more and more. I've talked to a lot of seniors who have rented for decades, often living in the same building or the same unit for decades. And their rent has gone up a little bit every year. Now it's going up $100 a year. And they can do the math. They know what their income is. They're often on a fixed income. And you can do the math and see, okay, how many years of $100 rent, $100 a month increases can I face? And say, okay, I have to leave Burlingame by 2021. That is an enormous problem we have to get our arms around. And even if we build a lot more affordable housing, which we should, I actually think we should do a lot more with all the parking lots the city owns. We have 18 of them. We've got one project underway. It's going to be 8 years from start to finish. I think we need to get the next set going. But even if we do that, we had a few hundred units of affordable housing. You have to get this other stuff under control, or the families that are not lucky enough to get into one of those units because they didn't win that affordable housing lottery, they're just going to face rising rents year after year after year. And I think this is a problem up and down the peninsula, is cities, they grant we are in a housing crisis, we need to build some homes, but then a big tech company wants to grow, they roll out the red carpet. San Bruno rejected a housing project, but then YouTube wants to add 2 million square feet of office, go ahead. South San Francisco adding tens of thousands of jobs and just a few hundred homes. This cycle has to change, and I think we need to break it here in Burlingame if we want to hold on to vulnerable families. Thanks.
So thank you very much. First thing I just want to mention, because it sounds like maybe people are unaware of this, but it looks like AB 1482 is passed, which is a rent stabilization and essentially rent control. So that will, when that gets implemented throughout the state, that will result in some people being able to stay in their homes. So I know you're concerned about that, but it looks like it's probably going to be taken care of. The bigger question, I believe, is the jobs housing imbalance that's going on. Also, I want to point out that when we look at those housing numbers, and they've grown from 10 years ago, a decade, we were in the middle again of the Great Recession. So when we're adding those jobs, we've already lost 30, 40,000 jobs, 50,000 jobs, and then we're adding back up to that point and then on top of. Housing is stable. In other words, it's built environment. It doesn't change. Jobs are fungible. They have more vicissitudes over time. And so it's really almost impossible to always match the jobs and the housing. I think the way that the county and that we're doing with Home for All, in terms of having a more county-wide and regional-wide conversation about building more housing and giving everyone the tools to build them is what we're really talking about here. But in terms of our fees, more specifically, in addition to the amazing short and longer term things that we're looking at doing with the fees, one other thing we're thinking about doing is helping landlords solve the soft-sided housing problems. So the older apartment buildings that need to be upgraded, they need better electric, they need to be lower greenhouse gases, they maybe need better parking. We're going to work and help and invest in those so that both the tenants and the landlords can have better living conditions, which would be great, safer living conditions. So that's another thing we'll be doing with those fees.
So I just want to add a little more detail on the bill that Mayor Colson mentioned. AB 1482 was a rent cap bill passed by the legislature. It will restrict rent increases to inflation plus 5%. So typically 7 to 9% a year. That really will prevent landlords who get sort of a gouging rent increase. They raise your rent $500 at a time. It's not going to stop $100 a year every year. That's only 3 or 4% or 5%, depending what you're paying now. That's what I really worry about. We keep marching ahead with those kind of increases. That pushes people out.
As you know, renters in Burlingame have never had protection from evictions, even if they are good tenants. Why doesn't the City Council know how many people are being evicted each year in Burlingame, and what policies will you put in place to track this information?
So, just cause eviction. It's such a, it's a complicated question. My concern of, well, first of all, let's start with the voters of Burlingame have dealt us a hand and policy direction for Citizens Initiative in the 1980s, and then again in 2 years ago, was it? Measure R, where it prohibits the City Council from legislating things like on real estate. So, for example, rent control prohibits that. It prohibits things like just cause eviction. Let's talk about that for a second. So, just cause eviction policies really go hand in hand with rent control. And just cause eviction, obviously, we don't want people to lose their home unjustly. There's no human being that could possibly think that that's a good idea, right? We want to keep people housing stable. The problem with some of the just cause eviction policies, and this is where there's no way in 2 minutes we can deal with this. The concern when these policies are implemented is that sometimes the unintended consequence is that there's a lot of litigation that ends up falling into these communities that have some of these policies and end up eventually coming back and driving up rents long term. As far as the data on the number of evictions, I think there's also a question of semantics. of defining what is an eviction. Is an eviction when somebody who can't pay their rent considered an eviction, or is an eviction when you have a legal action and someone is removed from their home for various violations or what have you? As far as the data on that, we don't have data on that. I'm not sure how we get data on that. I'm sure there's housing advocacy organizations that have that, but we're a city that doesn't have a huge housing authority, so we don't have data on that. And I would imagine, I don't know some of the real estate codes where that's not necessarily public information. I don't know the answer to that, how we get that data, and I'm out of time. Okay, very complex question. I hope we can continue to talk about.
Just cause eviction policy, the state has basically stepped in and is going to do it for us. Once AB 1482 is signed by Governor Newsom, which I suspect it will be, it basically will prevent as long as you've lived in a unit for at least 12 months, will prevent a landlord from removing you for what's considered not a just cause. So a just cause would be things like your building is getting knocked down and another one's going to be built in its place, or a close family member of the owner is moving into the unit. Otherwise, you're not allowed to just be arbitrarily evicted. And I think this kind of protection is actually important, because what you would see a lot, and the renters worry about a lot, especially when you have like a big tech company moving in nearby, is that you live in an older building, it gets sold to an investor. The whole thesis for that investor is that the rents of that building are below market. You can remodel it a little bit and get up to market. So that's how you make it happen. And what a lot of renters worry about is your building gets sold, and then at any moment you can be given a 60-day notice that you're out of here. And to be able to scramble for new housing in just 60 days that you weren't planning on is really tough. And so just cause eviction protections will help stop that kind of situation. And combined with the rent cap means the landlord, if they wanted to push you out, they can't just double your rent as a way of pushing you out either. So that provides a lot of protection. I think as far as collecting data, I think some simple things the city can do would just say like, hey, if you are going to the courthouse to file an eviction notice for whatever reason, send the city a copy. And you can just do a simple tracking them. You can destroy the records afterwards, but just track how many evictions are being filed in Burlingame in a given year. I think you could also do the same thing with rent increases above a certain size, is say, hey, just send us a copy, and we're not going to keep the specifics, but we'll want to see the total numbers. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So just cause eviction, and this is where I keep going back to saying that even if you have rent control and you have just cause eviction, if someone cannot pay the rent, they're going to lose their home. So this, using our linkage fees to help provide that stopgap is going to be really critical to keeping people housed in Burlingame, because we know factually that the #1 way people become homeless is through that kind of situation and losing their home. So we did check with Samaritan House when we did the work on our housing linkage fees, and they told us that over the past year, they have had about 3 Burlingame people that have applied for assistance to stay in their house through Samaritan House. So we do know that there have been about 3 people who potentially were going to lose their homes, who Samaritan House was able to step in and partner with and then put that together. They said totaling about $10,000 in rent. So that data is not, it's a little anecdotal, but that is what we have. The good news is we are hoping to hire a new community development director to help out with our businesses. And there is one candidate, and I'm not sure who they're going to hire, but one candidate who could do 3/4 of that job, and then maybe 1/4 of their job could go toward helping us on housing. Because right now, all of our staff that's doing housing is housed in the community development department, and they're very, very busy. So what I want to balance is getting effective and important empirical data with just adding more work onto our already belabored staff, because we really want them to be approving apartment buildings and approving more housing, not stuck on data and things like that. If we can get that new person, maybe we could get more of that data, and I support that.
different facet here. All three candidates mentioned their first-hand experience with youth. How do they plan to engage more youth in the community?
Are we alternating how we take?
I'm happy to take that.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think I'd go first.
Yeah, you go first. We're gonna make you go first. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to involve youth. I'm obviously a former teacher. One of the things that I think would actually be really beneficial, and it's not outside the scope of the city, but is lowering the voting age. So I know there's some proposals that will go, I think they have to go on the ballot, but it would basically allow 17-year-olds to vote in a primary to then be able, if you're 17 at the age of the primary, but 18 by election day, you get to vote in that primary. I think one of the things we sort of miss as a society is like that the moment you have kids actually really highly engaged in their local community, when they're in high school, when they're studying civics, they're learning how government works, that's the moment we should give them an actual voice to be able to affect decision making. And so I'd like to see, personally, I think the voting age should be either 17 or 16 flat, so that any 16-year-old or any 17-year-old could vote. Because I think by that point, you do have the maturity to be able to weigh in. And before you jump off to college, I think it's valuable for you to be able to vote locally and help make decisions locally. As far as how to encourage more engagement in government, I think one of the ways you do that is through what commissions and committees you set up. We have a number of commissions on things like traffic and beautification and parks and recreation. I'd like to see a couple others. I think youth could be one, or we could intentionally take some of the commissions and intend for youth to have some of the seats. So one commission I think we should have would be something like equity and human relations, to look at things like equity across different lines of difference, whether it's race or age or home ownership status. And I think a commission like that would be very, perfectly appropriate, and we should demand that you have young people under 18 or in a certain age bracket be part of that. When they have a seat at the table, then I think that you'll surface a lot of issues that affect young people. So I'd start with commissions.
So we do have a youth advisory commission. It has 25 kids on it, and they're all from the middle schools, they're all from around here. They either have to live or go to school in Burlingame, and they're really engaged, and I worked with them as a park and recreation commissioner. I knew them all, I know most of them. And I have 2 teenagers, now college students, so I'm pretty involved in this area of youth voter and activism. So we have registered 450 kids at Burlingame High School, pre-register them to vote, as well as my own 2 daughters are members of the League of Women Voters, and they have gone out and really pushed through their social media to make sure that all these kids in Burlingame get registered. And I'm super proud of the 2 of them for doing that. They're helping teach their friends how to use, the vote by mail and how to work that all out. As far as kids 15 to 16-year-old, it's interesting. 80% of them are telling us they're juuling at the high school. I wish they could actually have the brain power to realize that they shouldn't be juuling, and then maybe I'd say you can have the right to vote at that age. It's just driving me crazy. We are working to actually stop and deal with some of the tobacco and other related issues. Another thing that we're doing right now, we work really closely with both the middle school and with the high school kids to keep them involved in the community. We do youth meetings every 6 months with different council members, and we're going to be launching something in the fall, November 17th to 23rd, called Burlingame Stands United Against Hate. And it's an offshoot of some of the work we're doing with the Anti-Defamation League at Burlingame High to educate kids and help them understand what is hate language and hate crimes and get them involved through activism. I've hosted March for Our Lives at my house. I've had those kids out helping recruit the local Burlingame kids. We did a seminar for 450 kids at Burlingame High. So we're doing a lot.
So I won't repeat what the mayor has talked about from a city perspective. I think we're deeply committed. We can always do better. Outreach and communication and engaging people is really important. Just yesterday I was talking to about 70 third graders at Washington Elementary talking about local government. hosted, the mayor's helped me to, we've hosted Girl Scout troops at City Hall. I've done a number of those and presentations going into the schools, leadership. I think it's really important for kids to see local elected leaders, engage them and ask them questions and hear their points of view, and student councils at Lincoln Elementary. I've kind of done the gamut. I think that's important. But I do think the listening sessions we started in Burlingame, I advocated during the last election, maybe we should look at a senior commission. We have to be thoughtful about how many commissions we start, because in a small city it does take staff time and effort. What we started was a senior listening session at that point. I worked with our staff to develop that, and then council members we rotate through, and that's morphed into our youth listening sessions with Mayor Colson sort of driven that this year, and those are really, really good things. The mayor mentioned our Burlingame Stands United Against Hate. That's so important, particularly at this moment in time in our community, in the civic dialogue in this country. It's pretty horrible right now, and I'm really proud of our city. Do the math. In January 2017, an agenda item I brought up, and then was Mayor Ortiz and I worked on drafting the diversity and inclusion ordinance for this diversity and inclusion resolution for our city in Burlingame. We sort of just restated, as unanimously supported by council, what this community stands for, that every community member is valued and important. And then the youth was very engaged in the summer of 2017 when there were hate crimes starting, where the faith leader organizations from the community did a march from St. Paul's to City Hall. It was wonderful to see youth. So I think we as leaders in the community owe it in a structured way to engage with youth, and then unstructured ways too.
How are you holding up?
Don't have to use the bathroom yet.
Working well together is important, but agreeing much of the time may not be, especially when it relates to representing a city of people with many different views and concerns. Please share with us a time you did not agree with your fellow council member or co-worker, and how did you resolve it? Who would like to go first?
So I think one of the best books I ever read about working as a team is something called 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And the fundamental insight of that book is that conflict on a team is not necessarily a bad thing. If you have a team where everyone's marching in lockstep, they all agree on everything, chances are you guys are going to miss something. That you actually need to have a really healthy debate and have a variety of perspectives represented to make the best decisions possible. And I think about this a lot in what work context I've been in. The story I always think of when it comes to having that kind of disagreement was a couple jobs ago. I was working for a nonprofit that had a personalized learning program that used technology in schools. In a project I was on, I was sort of acting as a project manager. There were 2 folks from our academics team, and then there was a software engineer. And one of the things I've learned working in education technology is that software engineers see the world a certain way, and former teachers see the world in a very different way. And figuring out how to bridge these gaps is really important. And I found in myself, I sort of acted as a mediator in a lot of ways, really had to go out of my way to understand the perspectives of both of these very, very different sides, and try to truly internalize, okay, what is this other person saying? My instinct is not to agree with it, but what is deeply underneath there? Why do they believe that? And I think having that kind of empathy for how others think and making sure you can fully understand their argument is sort of the best way to then come up with compromises or solutions.
Healthy debate and differences of opinion are so important. That's the fabric of our democracy, that we cannot change the world alone. On city council, there are 5 members of the city council, and we differ a lot on opinions. We absolutely do, but we have rigorous debate, and then hopefully we always leave the debate in the dais and then continue to move on. And remember, you can't burn bridges because you need 3 votes to get anything done. So it's great if you're off in the field and you're advocating and you're actually hammering your colleagues about how wrong they are about some philosophical debate. Well, the next week you have to work with them on other things. So it's really important you work as a team. I think you had a question when we disagreed. There was one policy issue that is probably near and dear to all of us here, and we had some differences of opinion. Not that anybody is wrong or a terrible person, but in our affordable housing development on lots F and N, it's been slow going. It's a very complicated project, and about a year and a half ago, there were some big debates with the developer, and some of us were more patient with the developer than others. Some of us were less patient, and I came out pretty strongly. It was in the minority that I believe the developer had assured us that we were going to get prevailing wage on that housing component, definitely on the parking garage, but very frustrated with that, very frustrated with the timing and the anticipation, and I was willing to reconsider maybe regrouping with a different developer. That didn't go over so well with my colleagues. I learned an important lesson about how to frame things better on the dais moving forward. But that was an issue that I lost the debate on prevailing wage on the housing, not because my colleagues are evil, but because they saw that the end goal to get the affordable housing built in their judgment was more important. I philosophically disagreed, but when the time came for it to come together and approve that project, I continue to say there are things I do not like about this project and have concerns, but I'm going to support it. So that's how we have to move forward together as a team and respect each other's views. And know that everybody is really trying to do what's in the best interest.
The Burlingame City Council, I would say we, on easy little things, we all kind of agree. There's a lot of consent stuff around contracts and things, and they just go snapping through. But on more important policy issues, I think we have a pretty robust debate. And while the vote may end up a certain way, the way we all get there is not often the same. And I think that's really important. And an example that I would use that the City Council has done in terms of bringing a lot of diverse coalitions and factions together was the work we did with Burlingame Talks together about housing. And I think it's the way that when we brought, renters and school people and homeowners together and business owners, and the council just stood back and was quiet. And we let all these people talk. Guess what? We all found out that we have a lot in common. That 90% of us all want the same thing, a rich, diverse, welcoming community here in Burlingame. And it took us getting to that point and using that format of collegial conversation and explaining other people's views to basically then be able to move forward on a general plan that allowed for 20% growth in Burlingame. We approved that general plan on January 4th in 5 minutes with no contentious discussion. Carol Groom, the mayor of East Palo Alto, Carol Groom supervisor, told me they would never ever have imagined this happened in Burlingame, and they were very proud of that. And we're using that same format, that same really good communication format, to talk about the retail environment in Burlingame. We did Burlingame Talks Shop. I'm hoping we're going to do maybe Burlingame Talks Family, about family issues around biking and all kinds of daycare and other things. And we're also using it around Burlingame Sea Level Rise. So we're doing Sea Change Burlingame. So we're using that same format for all of these contentious and difficult conversations.
What is our time? Okay. How many more questions would you like me to ask?
I would think.
All of them? Okay. All right. So with the closing of the Art Museum and the Pez Museum, we are becoming museum-starved. Can't we find room for museums before they move to Redwood City?
Go ahead. Great question.
I can't sing like Emily can, but I can draw. Do not put me in front of a mic to sing. You'll be very, very sorry. But if you need me to do the stage set for her, I'm super happy to do it. So art is really one of my passions. The only other school I considered going to was art school for college, but I knew I couldn't probably make a living at it, so I got a degree in economics instead. So I really care about art. I'm on the board at Filoli. We are all about art and culture and museums. I'm on the board of the National Trust for Historic Preservation in Washington, D.C. We do a lot to preserve art and culture in the entire country. I represent all 48 of the sites throughout the entire US. So this is a conversation that is near and dear to my heart. What we need to do in Burlingame is talk to our developers, both apartment and office building, and get community space that we can use to share art and continue to have art. Our new community center is going to be a hub for art. We're going to be able to display a lot of community art there. We're going to be able to do a lot of great work. I will be very sad to lose the Peninsula Art Museum if they have to go. And I can tell you, I've been meeting with everyone from the post office over to other big developers on the Bayfront, trying to secure, they need almost 20,000 square feet of space, some type of space for them. And I think that's the way we're going to have to do it. We're going to have to trade off not just community benefits, you know, can't always just be about housing. Sometimes it also has to be about daycare. Sometimes it has to be about art. Sometimes it has to be about all those things. And we are bringing art into the community through our beautification commission as well, which I'm very excited about, and looking to expand them to include more community art. Art is important. Art is the heart of Burlingame.
So I think losing some of these nonprofit institutions is sort of a symptom of what's going on with local business generally, where, you know, if you are a business or if you're a nonprofit, your chances are the rent for your commercial space is going up. Chances are it is harder and harder to hire people that can work either a service sector job or make nonprofit wages. This is one of the big reasons I got interested in housing as an issue, is I was working for a nonprofit in Redwood City and saw all my coworkers deciding to move away because you can't really raise a family around here on a nonprofit salary. I agree that community space like this is one of those benefits you can demand. It's part of development. But I think one of the bigger opportunities in the long term is rethinking our many city-owned parking lots in downtown. So I referred to this earlier. We do have the affordable housing project on lots F and N. There's still 16 other city-owned parking lots. I think it'd actually be a really good idea for us to take a more comprehensive look at those and say, okay, we've got 16 lots in really valuable land, close to transit, close to where a lot of people live, close to the businesses that people love to shop at. What is a better use of that land than 20 parking spots? And you have to figure out where people park, so you build a couple of garages, and you should have a lot of land left over to do other things. And I'd like to see, you know, take the comprehensive inventory of what do we want to see in our downtowns. Affordable housing is a part of that. We probably want open, you know, public plazas. We want public spaces like, you know, office space that you can exclusively reserve for locally serving nonprofits. It could be a museum. You want spaces for the community to be able to gather. I think that is the single biggest opportunity to solve some of this, and you don't necessarily have to rely 100% on extracting that benefit from a community, from a developer. You can start to do it with the land that the city already owns right now.
Thank you, great question. I'm a different kind of an artist, a musician, but passionate about the arts, and appreciate the question. I think it's important to pause for a moment and think about the Peninsula Art Museum. The reason the art museum is going, does anybody know why? What's being built there? Housing.
Offices.
Housing too. Housing. Housing is what's proposed. We are getting a lot of heat for that, but it is for a bigger vision, which is the northern part of our city is a great transit-oriented development location for housing as well. I think another thing we can do in our downtown core, and that's what we're talking about, is remember the general plan was just done, the next step is updating the zoning code for the city. What uses can be in different places. And one of the things we're doing, we heard loud and clear from the communities, we need more flexibility in our zoning code to let the market sort of bring in uses that people want. And we're considering opening up some flexibility, so large retail spaces like maybe the Bevmo place that's hard to find, you know, if they ever go out, or J. Crew that has the big space that's kind of hard to rent. Could we subdivide that slightly so that infill office that brings vibrancy in people and can help fill up spaces but still have frontage of retail could be a potential solution. In some cases, when you allow the market to actually fill those spaces, it allows other spaces to get subsidized by things that don't pay as much, like art, so I think there's hope there. I totally agree with Mike. I think I'm very protective of public land because I think we need to use our public land, whether it's surface parking lots or other public land, for uses that aren't revenue generator. And if you followed city politics, I've been very consistent. On Topgolf, I have a different view of what we should be doing on public land. On the State Lands Commission parcel, I believe we should lean into open space. Peninsula Healthcare District, we need to lean into other uses besides just commercial activity. So I'm very protective of public lands, and I think we need to use those for things like entertainment and the arts as well, and I hope we will.
What are the most critical changes we need to make to face the future effectively in 2 minutes?
2 minutes. I will.
So one of the most critical changes we need to face the future is dealing with greenhouse gas emissions and sea level rise and environmental change and environmental injustice. In Burlingame, we just passed our climate action plan. It went through on a 5-0 vote. We had an amazing amount of input, thank you very much, from the CEC and our local community environmentalists. We are working very closely. I'm on the board of Peninsula Clean Energy. We are working to bring in more EV chargers, to get more EV cars in the hands not just of wealthy people. We started a program for low-income people as well, partnering with, which I was a huge advocate for, because I do work with Peninsula Family Services, and I saw how hard it was for young mothers with 3 kids and no car to try to get their kids to school on public transit. So getting them an EV car is a wonderful way for them to participate and teach their kids about the environment. We're looking at single-use plastics. We're looking at getting rid of those. We are building a community center that is going to be net zero energy. It will be 100% electric, and it will not be adding to our carbon footprint. We are working on our bike ped master plan, and we are working to get more people out of cars. I walked here today because I live in a walkable community. I'm sure Emily probably rode a bike. She often does. So if we don't do a lot of good work around the environmental story, we have just started a new flood and sea level rise district. I was very fortunate to be elected by all of the mayors on the peninsula to be the representative for the North County. And we have also just started a high priority Sea Change Burlingame that Councilman Brownrigg and I are working on to develop an entire plan for the Bayfront on how we are going to protect both our hotel revenue assets, our we also have our water treatments that are out there and a bunch of things, and our low-lying neighborhoods to make sure that we leave our children a flourishing, healthy community.
I agree with Mayor Coulson that I think long-term climate change is probably going to have the largest impact on all of our lives and deserves the highest level of priority we can possibly give it. I think in the short to medium term, something that impacts climate change, but I think impacts just everyone's life here, is what we end up doing with the Bayfront. So I've thrown out the stats before. The general plan envisions 3,000 homes citywide. It also envisions 10,000 net new jobs in Burlingame. My suspicion is that if we continue with sort of the zoning updates on the Bayfront, what we're going to see happen once Facebook's in sort of establishes that Burlingame is a good place for tech to grow, is we will see a lot of other development on the Bayfront exclusively for office. So the old Hyatt Cinema has already had an application go in a few years ago. I suspect a new one will come in with the upzoned allowance of land. The Hilton has already said that they want to develop a large portion of their parking lot. What I suspect is we'll just add quickly 10,000 jobs right there on the Bayfront. And what will that mean for our city when there's 10,000 jobs there and maybe 1,500 to 1,000 new homes? And I think that means a lot of people that live here who didn't get into the housing market when it was affordable are going to be pushed out. We've already seen what happens when we add tens of thousands of jobs across the county and just a few thousand homes. Rents go up dramatically in short periods of time. And that's the thing I worry about most. We have to pivot off this path of adding far more jobs than our housing supply can support. Every city across the peninsula is basically making the same mistake. Either we solve it here or Sacramento is going to step in and solve it for us. I'd like to see Burlingame stop making this problem worse. And one of the things that it actually benefits climate change in the end, when people live near their jobs, they drive less, they use fewer resources. It's the only solution in the long term is to have people living a walkable, bikeable life.
He's good at pivoting. We still haven't had a chance to address the development on the Bayfront directly as a question. But let me address the biggest things we need to do to address the biggest, what was the question, the challenges? Hang on, let me see what's happening. I want to make
What are
sure.
the most critical changes
we need to make?
face the future?
I think one of the most critical changes is change the tone of the way we govern and dialogue in our country and in our region. And I think we do that pretty well at local government, which is we take off our armor and we have kind conversations. We may disagree on policy, but that we roll up our sleeves and try to fix problems in our community, being respectful of one another. And I think leaders at the local level we do a pretty good job of role modeling that. Sometimes we're not perfect, but I think even this debate we've had in this election is a really good example of that. There's a lot of good people in local government trying to do the right thing for the community. If we can treat one another with respect and kindness, we can solve and tackle the big challenges. The big three things, absolutely climate change. We have to deal with transportation challenges, which is directly related to how our cities are built and how that affects our environment with carbon in the air. And affordability. And we spend a lot of time in this election talking to people even who don't have affordability challenges. We have a tale of two cities in Burlingame. We have tremendous wealth, and we have people that are really struggling. But to bring the community along and help everybody understand why affordability matters to them, even if they're not struggling to pay their rent, how it impacts the services. We need teachers, we need home health care workers, we need retail workers, hotel workers, restaurant workers. We need everybody in this community that's valued to keep our economy humming and to have the quality of life we want in this community. And we also need to reduce the traffic on our roads because people are traveling so far to live where the jobs are. So what's in it for everybody? Affordability matters on a moral level and then, of course, on a practical level. And I would like to, see the next question.
I'm doing a lot of work on the Bayfront right now. There's a few different projects that are going on, and that land down there is around $10 million, $5 to $10 million per acre. And there have been a lot of real estate developers who really pressured the council to put housing on the Bayfront. One of the reasons we don't is because of transportation is not good out there, schools can't get there. And the other thing is, if you build on $10 million with Bayfront views, that's not going to be affordable housing. It's going to be market rate, rich people housing.
Amen.
Can't do it in 30 seconds, but one of the realities of running a city is that it costs money to run a city, and every year it gets more expensive to do so. We have to lean into housing and build more housing, and we're doing that in different parts of the city. But as we grow and we have more people, we need more services, we need more police officers, we need more library services, we need more park and rec, we need more potholes filled. Part of the balance that we're talking about is that you need revenue streams to do that, and current revenue streams aren't always sufficient to get what we need to get done. So part of the commercial development in a thoughtful way will help subsidize the services and the quality of life that we need.
So I think when it comes to the Bayfront, yeah, it probably is going to be expensive, the person who's willing to rent the Bayfront apartments. And you know what? Who can afford that? Facebook employees that make tons of money. And I'd much rather they rent those units that are brand new and have tons of amenities than come to downtown Burlingame and go to some of these older buildings and say, you know what, yeah, it's not great, but I'll pay $4,000 a month for this thing. Because I think that's what renters here really worry about, is they're about to get outbid by much richer employees. And that's what's been happening over and over, and the thing that we have to stop.
First about offices. I want to thank you all for coming. It's really important who's on our city council. It couldn't be more important to each and every person who lives in Burlingame. And I also wanted to say that we have a couple of things for Housing for All Burlingame, which is an organization made up of homeowners and renters who want to make sure that renters can stay in their homes. We have an email list over there, and you can sign up to be on our email list, and that would be really great if you want to be on the list. And the other thing is, for Topgolf, one of our group's primary objectives is that Topgolf is going to be this enormous, expensive entertainment facility, and it's on city-owned land. And if it weren't for the fact that the land is the old dump and is toxic, we could have built housing out there. It would have had to have been offered to affordable housing developers under the State Surplus Lands Act. However, it's toxic, and so instead we're going to have the Topgolf facility there. And our position is that every dollar of revenue, every dollar of rent that goes from Topgolf to the city should go into our affordable housing fund. Because if it weren't toxic, we would have affordable housing out there. So I wanted to point that out. We have a petition over there to sign for that, if you'd like to sign. And thank you again very much for our candidates for coming and being forthcoming.